Sarah Jenkins pulled her worn jacket tighter around her shoulders as she pushed her cleaning cart through the quiet hallways of Maxwell Enterprises. The clock on the wall showed 11:30 p.m., and most of the building's employees had gone home hours ago. Only the soft hum of the vacuum cleaner and the gentle squeak of her comfortable work shoes broke the silence of the 45th floor. At 28 years old, Sarah took pride in her work, even if others looked down on her for being a janitor. Her dark skin gleamed with a thin layer of sweat as she moved efficiently from one task to another. The night shift wasn't easy, but it paid better than day work, and she needed every extra dollar she could earn to help put her younger brother through college. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a stunning view of the city lights below. Sarah paused for a moment, remembering how her mother used to tell her that everyone's work had dignity, no matter what others thought. The memory brought both warmth and sadness to her heart. It had been 2 years since her mom passed away, leaving behind more questions than answers. As Sarah turned the corner toward the main conference room, she heard raised voices. The light was on, which was unusual for this hour. She checked her schedule again. The room wasn't supposed to be occupied. She needed to clean it before midnight to stay on track with her duties. Taking a deep breath, Sarah knocked gently on the door. When no one responded, she used her master key to open it, assuming the previous occupants had simply forgotten to turn off the lights. As the door swung open, she found herself face to face with James Maxwell IO, the company's billionaire CEO, in the middle of what appeared to be a heated video conference. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" James's voice cut through the air like a whip. His steel gray suit probably cost more than Sarah's yearly salary, and his perfectly styled hair and sharp features matched the magazine covers she'd seen him on. Sarah stepped back, her heart racing. "I'm sorry, sir. The schedule showed this room was empty. I can come back later." "Do you have any idea what you just interrupted?" James stood up, his 6'2" frame towering over her. On the large screen behind him, several faces watched the scene unfold. "This is a confidential meeting with our Asian partners. Do you know what time it is in Tokyo?" "I apologize, Mr. Maxwell. There must have been a mistake with the scheduling system." Sarah tried to keep her voice steady, but she could feel her hands trembling. James' lip curled in disgust. "The only mistake here is whoever thought it was a good idea to hire someone so incompetent. What's your name?" "Sarah Jenkins, sir." He pulled out his phone and started typing. "Well, Sarah Jenkins, I'll make sure your supervisor knows about this interruption. Maybe next time they'll hire someone who can read a simple schedule." The executives on the screen shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke up. Sarah felt her cheeks burn with humiliation, but she held her head high. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing her cry. "Now get out," James snapped, "and don't let me see you on this floor again." Sarah backed out of the room, closing the door quietly behind her. As she gripped her cleaning cart, she could still hear James's voice through the door, now apologizing smoothly to his business partners for the unfortunate interruption by the cleaning stuff. In the safety of the supply closet, Sarah finally let out a shaky breath. She pulled out the worn photo she kept in her pocket, a picture of her mother standing in front of a small house, smiling proudly. If only her mother could see her now, working in the building that bore the Maxwell name. But more importantly, if only James Maxwell II knew who she really was, that the woman he had just humiliated was actually his stepsister. Sarah straightened her uniform and checked her watch. It was still only 11:45 p.m., and she had 7 more floors to clean before her shift ended. She wouldn't let this incident break her spirit. After all, she was her mother's daughter, and more importantly, she was James Maxwell I's stepdaughter, even if his son didn't know it yet. With renewed determination, she pushed her cart toward the elevator, knowing that someday the truth would come to light. But for now, she had work to do, and she would do it with dignity. The small apartment felt especially quiet as Sarah unlocked her door at 7:30 a.m. Her feet ached from the long night shift, but she couldn't rest yet. She had promises to keep and bills to pay. The morning sunlight streamed through her worn curtains, highlighting the neat but modest furniture that filled her home. Sarah walked to her bedroom and pulled out an old shoebox from under her bed. Inside were the secrets her mother had kept for so many years. Her hands trembled slightly as she lifted out the marriage certificate. The elegant paper felt heavy in her hands as she read the names again. Maria Jenkins and James Maxwell Hill. The date showed they had been married for 8 months before his sudden death. Next to the certificate was a stack of love letters. Sarah picked up one dated just 2 weeks before the elder Maxwell's fatal heart attack. Her mother had read these letters to her only once, on her deathbed 2 years ago. The words were burned into Sarah's memory. My dearest Maria, I know my family doesn't approve of our marriage. Their prejudice runs deep, but my love for you runs deeper. I've changed my will to include you and your wonderful daughter Sarah. You both deserve everything I can give you. I only wish I had met you sooner in life. Sarah wiped away a tear as she remembered her mother's last words. Your stepfather was a good man, Sarah, so different from what people thought. He wanted to tell everyone about us, but then the heart attack. Her mother had never finished that sentence. The phone on her bedside table buzzed, interrupting her thoughts. It was a text from her younger brother, Marcus. Sis, my college tuition is due next week. Are you sure you can help? I can take a break if it's too much. Sarah quickly typed back, Don't worry about it. Your education comes first. I got it covered. She didn't tell them about the extra cleaning jobs she'd taken on at a nearby office building. He had enough to worry about with his studies. As she set down her phone, Sarah's eyes fell on a newspaper clipping she kept in the box. It showed James Maxwell Ayoy at his father's funeral, standing tall and proud. He looked so much like his father, but there was something different in his eyes. Something cold that his father never had. Sarah remembered watching that funeral from afar. Her mother had taken her, but they stood at the back of the crowd. That's your stepbrother, her mother had whispered. Your father wanted you two to know each other, to be family. But after his death, all the legal papers had mysteriously disappeared. The family lawyer who had helped with the will had died in a car accident shortly after, and without proof, they had no claim to anything, not even the right to call themselves family. The morning news played quietly on her small TV as Sarah prepared for bed. A business report showed James Maxwell AI announcing another successful company merger. Maxwell Enterprises continues to grow, he said smoothly to the cameras. My father built this company on excellence, and I won't accept anything less. Sarah turned off the TV with a tired sigh. If only he knew how his father had really been, kind, accepting, and brave enough to love whoever he wanted, no matter what society thought. The James Maxwell too she had known from her mother's stories was nothing like the cold man his son had become. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was her supervisor. Meeting tomorrow about last night's incident, 6 p.m. sharp. Sarah set her alarm, knowing she'd only get a few hours of sleep before her next shift. As she drifted off, she thought about the hidden documents in her box. Sometimes she wondered if she should just show them to James, tell him the truth about who she was. But her mother's voice echoed in her memory. Timing is everything, my dear. The truth has power, but you must be wise about when to use it. For now, Sarah would keep working, keep helping her brother, and keep her father's letters safe. The time for truth would come, but not yet. Not until she was ready. Not until she knew exactly how to make her stepbrother understand that family meant more than money and power. It meant love, acceptance, and respect, just as his father had tried to teach him. The next week at Maxwell Enterprises was harder than ever for Sarah. Word had spread about her run-in with James Maxwell AI, and now even other cleaning staff avoided her, afraid that his anger might spread to them too. But Sarah kept her head high and continued her work, even as her supervisor gave her the most difficult tasks. One evening, as Sarah cleaned the executive bathrooms on the 45th floor, she heard familiar voices approaching. Quickly, she stepped into a supply closet, leaving her cleaning cart outside. Through the thin walls, she could hear James Maxwell AI talking to his board members. The shareholders are breathing down my neck, James said, his voice tight with stress. We need to cut costs somewhere, and I'm thinking the cleaning service is a good place to start. That incident last week showed me how unprofessional they are. Sarah's heart beat faster. There were over 50 cleaning staff in the building, many of them single parents or people supporting families. They couldn't afford to lose their jobs. But James, an older man's voice, spoke up. Mr. Thompson, one of the senior board members. Your father always believed in taking care of all employees, regardless of their position. My father isn't here anymore, James snapped. And I'm tired of people telling me what he would have wanted. This is my company now. Sarah's phone buzzed in her pocket. She quickly silenced it, but not fast enough. The voices outside went quiet. What was that? James asked sharply. The supply closet door flew open. Sarah stood there, face to face with her stepbrother and 3 board members. James's face turned dark with anger. "You again?" he growled. "Were you spying on us?" "No, sir," Sarah said firmly, though her hands shook. "I was just doing my job." "Your job?" James laughed coldly. "Your job is to clean, not to hide in closets and listen to private conversations." He pulled out his phone and started recording. "Let's see how the head of cleaning services likes this. Tell me, what's your name again?" "Sarah Jenkins, sir, and I wasn't hiding. I stepped aside because I was taught to stay out of the way of executives." James zoomed his phone camera close to her face. "Well, Sarah Jenkins, you won't have to worry about staying out of anyone's way soon. You're fired." "You can't fire her without proper cause." Mr. Thompson stepped forward. "It's against company policy." "Watch me," James said, still recording. "I want you out of this building in 20 minutes. Security will escort you out." What happened next took everyone by surprise. A young executive who had been quietly watching pulled out her own phone. She had been recording too, but not Sarah. She had been recording James. "I'm sorry, Mr. Maxwell," the young woman said, her voice shaking but determined. "But I've been documenting your treatment of the cleaning staff for weeks. The way you're acting, it's workplace harassment." James spun around, his face red with rage. "Ms. Chen, you're fired too." "Actually," Mr. Thompson said quietly, "any termination needs board approval first. And I think we need to discuss your recent behavior, James. Your father built this company on respect for all employees." "Stop talking about my father," James shouted, his voice echoing down the hallway. Several people poked their heads out of nearby offices, phones ready to record. Sarah stood straight and looked directly at James. "Your father," she said softly, "would be ashamed of what you've become." The words hit James like a slap. "How dare you talk about my father? You didn't know him. You're nothing but a janitor." "Security is coming," Miss Chen said, looking at her phone. "But they might want to see these videos first. They're already trending on social media." James looked around, suddenly aware of all the phones pointed at him. His perfect image was crumbling, and he knew it. Without another word, he stormed off, leaving his board members behind. Mr. Thompson turned to Sarah with curious eyes. Something about the way she had spoken about James's father bothered him. He had known the elder Maxwell well, and there was something familiar about Sarah's face, something he couldn't quite place. "Ms. Jenkins," he said kindly, "I think we should talk. There's more to this story, isn't there?" Sarah looked at the kind old man's face and wondered if perhaps the time for truth was coming sooner than she had planned. Mr. Thompson sat in his large office the next morning, staring at his computer screen. The viral videos of James Maxwell Aya's outburst had already reached millions of views. News channels were running stories about workplace harassment at Maxwell Enterprises, and the company's stock price was dropping. But that wasn't what kept the old board member up all night. It was Sarah Jenkins' face that haunted him. He had known James Maxwell too for 30 years, and something about the young janitor's eyes reminded him of his old friend. He pulled up the company's employee database and found Sarah's file. Born in 1996. Mother: Maria Jenkins. Father: unknown. Thompson rubbed his tired eyes, remembering something from long ago. "Martha," he called his secretary through the intercom. "Please bring me the old files from 1996, everything we have about James Sr. from that year." While waiting, he watched the viral video again. The way Sarah had spoken about the elder Maxwell, she had sounded so certain, so personal. "Your father would be ashamed," she had said. "Not Mr. Maxwell or the former CEO, but your father." Martha arrived with a dusty box of files. "Sir, these are all I could find. Most records from that time were lost in the office fire 10 years ago." Thompson nodded, thanking her. The fire had destroyed many old documents, including, if he remembered correctly, James Sr.'s last will and testament. Only a simple earlier version had survived, leaving everything to his son. As he dug through the files, a small envelope fell from between 2 folders. Inside was a photograph he had forgotten about, a company Christmas party from 1996. James Sr. stood in the center, but Thompson's eyes were drawn to a woman in the background. A beautiful black woman in a cleaning uniform, watching James from afar with an expression that looked like love. Thompson's hand shook as he read the name written on the back. Maria, Cleaning Staff Christmas Party 1996. He quickly opened his computer and typed Maria Jenkins' obituary into the search engine. A local newspaper article from 2 years ago appeared. The photo showed the same woman, aged but still recognizable, and next to her in the photo stood Sarah Jenkins, with those familiar eyes. The pieces were falling into place. Thompson remembered James Sr. acting strange that year, taking mysterious trips, seeming happier than usual. Then came his sudden heart attack, the missing will, and the tragic accident that killed their company lawyer shortly after. His office phone rang, startling him. It was the company's PR team. "Mr. Thompson, the board needs to meet immediately. The harassment videos have gone viral in Asia. Our biggest investors are demanding answers." "Schedule it for noon," he replied. "And one more thing. Please ask Ms. Jenkins from the cleaning staff to come to my office right away. Tell her it's important." 20 minutes later, Sarah sat nervously across from Thompson. She had expected to be fired, but the old man's kind eyes put her slightly at ease. "Ms. Jenkins," he said gently, placing the Christmas party photo on his desk. "Is this your mother?" Sarah's eyes widened. She had never seen this photo before. "Yes," she whispered. "That's her." Thompson took a deep breath. "I knew there was something familiar about you. You have his eyes, you know. James Sr.'s eyes." Sarah's hand went to her pocket, where she kept her mother's marriage certificate. "You knew?" she asked. "I suspected," Thompson replied. "Your mother and James Sr. They were married, weren't they?" Slowly, Sarah pulled out the certificate and placed it on his desk. Thompson read it carefully, his hands trembling. "This changes everything," he said finally. "The company, the inheritance, James Jr.'s position, all of it. But more importantly," he looked at Sarah with tears in his eyes. "It explains why James Sr. changed his will just before he died. He wanted to protect you and your mother." "The will?" Sarah leaned forward, but it was lost. Thompson smiled mysteriously. "The original was lost, yes, but I was the witness when James Sr. signed it. And I always keep copies of important documents in my personal safe at home." He paused, letting the words sink in. "Sarah, I think it's time for the truth to come out. Are you ready?" Sarah thought about her mother, about her younger brother struggling through college, about James's cruel words. She straightened her back and nodded. "Yes, Mr. Thompson, I'm ready." James Maxwell II sat alone in his massive office, watching his company's stock price fall on the large screen in front of him. His phone wouldn't stop buzzing with messages from board members, investors, and reporters. The videos of him yelling at Sarah had spread faster than he could control. A knock on his door interrupted his dark thoughts. "Go away," he shouted, but the door opened anyway. Mr. Thompson walked in, carrying a thick folder. "We need to talk, James," the old man said firmly. "About your father." James turned away. "I'm not in the mood for another lecture about how disappointed my father would be." "No lecture," Thompson said, placing a photo on James's desk. "Just truth." James looked at the photo and froze. It showed his father at a beach he didn't recognize, smiling happier than James had ever seen him. Next to him stood a beautiful black woman, and between them was a young girl with familiar eyes. "What is this?" James demanded, his voice shaking. "That was taken a month after your father married Maria Jenkins," Thompson said quietly. "The girl in the photo is Sarah Jenkins, your stepsister." James jumped up from his chair. "You're lying. This is some kind of trick. That janitor put you up to this." "Your father kept it secret because your grandfather threatened to take away the company," Thompson continued, pulling out more documents. "But he loved them, James, and he wanted to make it right." James picked up the beach photo with trembling hands. He remembered that summer. His father had been away a lot, claiming he was working. But in this photo, he looked so relaxed, so happy. "No," James whispered. "This can't be true." Thompson placed the marriage certificate on the desk. "It is true, and there's more." He pulled out a copy of the last will. "Your father changed his will before he died. He wanted Sarah and Maria to have part of the company." James sank back into his chair, his world spinning. All those times he had bullied Sarah, looked down on her, treated her like she was nothing. She had been his sister, his father's daughter. Suddenly, his office door burst open again. Ms. Chen, the executive he had tried to fire, rushed in with her phone. "Mr. Maxwell, you need to see this. Someone leaked old security footage from 1996. It shows your father and Maria Jenkins getting married in the company chapel. The video was already going viral. In it, James could clearly see his father beaming as he placed a ring on Maria's finger. Young Sarah stood nearby, holding flowers and smiling. James felt sick. Why didn't they ever tell me? They tried, Thompson said softly. After your father died, Maria came to the office with proof. But your grandfather's lawyers turned her away. Then the company lawyer died in that suspicious car accident, and the original will disappeared in the office fire. Convenient timing, Ms. Chen muttered, still recording everything on her phone. James stared at the beach photo again. His father's eyes, the same eyes he saw in Sarah, looked directly at the camera, full of joy and love. All these years, James whispered, I've been trying to live up to what I thought my father wanted, being tough, putting profit first, treating people like they were beneath me. He looked up at Thompson. But I was wrong about everything, wasn't I? Your father built this company on respect and kindness, Thompson said. He believed everyone deserved dignity, from the CEO to the cleaning staff. That's why he fell in love with Maria. She taught him to see people's true worth. James's phone buzzed again. The company's stock had dropped another 10%. Board members were calling for an emergency meeting. What am I supposed to do now? James asked, his voice small and lost. Thompson placed a hand on his shoulder. First, you need to talk to your sister. Really talk to her. It's time to heal these wounds, James. It's time to be the man your father always hoped you would become. James nodded slowly, looking at the happy family in the beach photo. For the first time, he saw what his father had been trying to teach him all along. Success wasn't about power or money. It was about love, respect, and treating everyone with dignity. Where is Sarah now? He asked quietly. In the boardroom, Thompson replied, waiting to tell her story to everyone. The Maxwell Enterprises boardroom was packed with people. All 12 board members sat around the large table, while reporters and executives lined the walls. Sarah sat at one end of the table, her hands folded calmly in her lap, though her heart was racing. Mr. Thompson stood beside her like a protective father. The room fell silent as James Maxwell Ayala walked in. He looked different from his usual confident self. His tie was loose, his hair slightly messy, and his eyes were red as if he hadn't slept. He carried the beach photo in his hand. Before we begin, James said, his voice shaking slightly, I need to say something to Sarah Jenkins. Everyone turned to look at Sarah. She sat straighter in her chair, preparing herself for whatever might come next. James walked toward her slowly. Last night, I learned something that changed everything I thought I knew about my father and this company. He placed the beach photo on the table where everyone could see it. Gasps filled the room. Is that James Sr.? Someone whispered. With the janitor? Another voice added. My father, James continued, his voice growing stronger, was a better man than I ever knew. He saw beyond titles, beyond race, beyond social class. He fell in love with a wonderful woman named Maria Jenkins, and he married her in secret because he was afraid of what our family would say. Sarah's eyes filled with tears as she looked at the photo. She had never seen this picture of her mother looking so happy. Sarah Jenkins is not just an employee of this company, James announced. She is my stepsister, my father's daughter. And I, his voice cracked, I have failed both her and my father's memory with my behavior. The room erupted in chaos. Reporters started shouting questions, board members began talking all at once, and cameras flashed from every direction. That's ridiculous, shouted Gerald Maxwell, James's uncle and a senior board member. This is clearly a scheme to get money from the company. Mr. Thompson stepped forward. I have proof. He opened his briefcase and pulled out the documents. The marriage certificate, witnesses' statements, and most importantly, James Sr.'s last will and testament. The will was destroyed in the fire, Gerald protested. This is my personal copy, Thompson replied. I witnessed it signing. It clearly states that Sarah Jenkins and her mother Maria were to receive 25% of the company's shares. More chaos erupted. Gerald's face turned red with anger. This is impossible. The Maxwell name. James interrupted loudly. Stands for more than just money and power. At least it should. He turned to Sarah. My father knew that. And it's time I learned it too. Sarah stood up slowly. The room grew quiet again. I never wanted your money, she said clearly. I kept this secret for years, working as a janitor in my father's building, watching how you treated people. I wanted to see if you could learn what our father tried to teach you, that every person deserves respect. James stepped closer to her. I failed that test. Badly. He looked around the room. But I want to make it right. Starting now. You can't be serious. Gerald shouted. You're going to give this cleaner, part of our company? No, James said firmly. I'm going to give my sister her rightful place in our family's company, the place our father wanted her to have. He turned to Sarah again, this time with tears in his eyes. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. The way I treated you. There's no excuse. But if you're willing, I'd like to try to be the brother our father wanted me to be. Sarah looked at him for a long moment. She saw the same eyes as their father's looking back at her, now filled with regret and hope. Our father believed in second chances, she said softly. He gave my mother one when he married her. Maybe it's time for another one. James held out his hand. Sarah looked at it, remembering all the times he had dismissed her, yelled at her, treated her like nothing. But then she remembered her mother's words. Forgiveness isn't about forgetting the past. It's about choosing a better future. Slowly, Sarah reached out and took her brother's hand. The news about Sarah and James spread like wildfire across social media. Hashtag Maxwell Secret and hashtag Janitor Princess were trending worldwide. News vans camped outside Maxwell Enterprises, hoping to catch a glimpse of the newly discovered siblings. Inside his luxury penthouse apartment, James sat alone, surrounded by old photo albums he had never bothered to look at before. Each page showed a different side of his father that he had never known. There were pictures of James Sr. visiting homeless shelters, playing with children at company daycare, and sharing meals with cleaning staff. His phone buzzed with a message from Sarah. Can we talk? Somewhere quiet. An hour later, they met in their father's old office, which hadn't been used since his death. Sarah walked in wearing regular clothes instead of her cleaning uniform, jeans, and a simple blue sweater. She looked different, more confident. I used to sneak peeks in here during my night shifts, Sarah said, running her hand along their father's old desk. Sometimes I'd imagine him sitting here, working late like in Mom's stories. James watched her, seeing their father's gentle expressions in her face. Tell me about him, he said softly. The father you knew. Sarah sat down in one of the leather chairs. He used to bring Mom flowers every Friday. Not expensive ones from fancy shops, but wild flowers he picked himself. He said real love wasn't about how much money you spent, but how much thought you put into making someone happy. James remembered the fresh flowers that always appeared on his father's desk. He had assumed they were from the office decorator. The night he died, Sarah continued, her voice trembling, he had been planning to tell you about us. Mom begged him to wait, worried about how your grandfather would react. But Dad said, my son has a good heart. He'll understand. James turned away, shame burning in his chest. He was wrong about me. No, Sarah said firmly. He was right about your heart. You just lost your way for a while. James picked up a framed photo from the desk, himself at his college graduation, standing proudly beside his father. I thought I knew what he wanted from me. Be tough. Make money. Keep the Maxwell name strong. But I never really knew him at all, did I? You knew one side of him, Sarah replied. I knew another. Maybe together we can understand the whole person he was. James sat down across from her. My behavior, the way I treated you and the other staff, I can't take that back. No, you can't, Sarah agreed. But you can learn from it. That's what Dad would have wanted. Suddenly, James remembered something. He rushed to the old wooden filing cabinet in the corner and pulled out a dusty box. Dad used to make video diaries, he explained, taking out an old tape. I never watched them after he died. It hurt too much. But maybe... He found an old video player in the cabinet and hooked it up to the office TV. The screen flickered to life, showing their father sitting at the same desk where they now sat. Today I did something brave. James Sr.'s voice filled the room. I married the most wonderful woman, Maria Jenkins. My family won't approve, but love doesn't care about approval. Maria's daughter Sarah is the sweetest child. She has my eyes. Everyone says so. Someday, when the time is right, I'll tell James about his new sister. I hope he'll understand that family is about love, not blood. Tears streamed down both Sarah and James's faces as they watched. Their father's voice continued, sharing his hopes, dreams, and love for both his children. I want my son to learn that true leadership isn't about power, he said in another clip. It's about lifting others up. And I want my daughter to know that her gentle spirit is a strength, not a weakness. Together, they could make this company something truly special. As the video ended, James and Sarah sat in silence, both feeling their father's presence in the room. He believed in us, James said finally. Both of us. Sarah nodded, wiping her eyes. So maybe it's time we believed in each other too. 1 year later, the Maxwell Enterprises building looked very different. The once cold lobby now featured a large portrait of James Maxwell High with his full family, including Maria and Sarah. Below it, a gold plaque read, "Every person has dignity. Every job has value. Every dream matters." Sarah walked through the lobby, no longer in a cleaning uniform, but wearing a professional suit. Employees smiled and waved as she passed. As the new head of employee relations and co-chair of the Maxwell Foundation, she had earned their respect not just through her name, but through her actions. She took the elevator to the top floor, where James was waiting in the conference room. Inside, her brother sat with Mr. Thompson and several other board members, reviewing plans for their latest project. "The community center is almost ready," Sarah announced, spreading out new photographs on the table. "We're naming it after Mom." The Maria Jenkins Community Center would offer free job training, childcare, and education support to help people build better lives. It was the first of many projects funded by the Maxwell Foundation, which Sarah and James now ran together. "Perfect timing," James smiled. "I just got off the phone with Marcus. He's graduating medical school next month, top of his class." Sarah beamed with pride. Her younger brother had not only finished college but had gone on to medical school, thanks to a scholarship program they had created in their father's name. "Your father would be proud of both of you," Mr. Thompson said, looking at the siblings. "You've transformed this company into everything he dreamed it could be." It was true. Under James and Sarah's joint leadership, Maxwell Enterprises had become known for more than just its profits. They had raised minimum wages, created advancement programs for all employees, and made sure every worker, from executives to cleaning staff, was treated with respect. The door opened and Ms. Chen walked in, now the company's chief of communications. "You both need to see this," she said, turning on the large screen. A major business magazine had just released its annual rankings. Maxwell Enterprises was rated Best Company for Worker Dignity for the second year in a row. "Remember when our stock crashed after the viral videos?" James asked, shaking his head with a smile. "Everyone said treating workers better would ruin us. Now our profits are higher than ever. Because happy workers make a better company," Sarah replied, quoting their father's words from his video diaries. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows as they wrapped up their meeting. James and Sarah walked together to their father's old office, which they now shared. They had kept his desk but added a second one, symbolizing their equal partnership. "Oh, I almost forgot," James said, pulling an envelope from his drawer. "Look what I found in the old storage room." Inside was another photograph they had never seen before. It showed their father sitting on a park bench with young Sarah, reading her a story. In the background, a teenage James played basketball, unaware of the camera. "We were so close to being a family back then," Sarah said softly. "If only?" "No more if onlys," James interrupted gently. "Dad used to say life is too short for regrets. What matters is what we do now." Sarah nodded, placing the photo on their father's desk next to a new family picture. James, Sarah, and Marcus at last year's company Christmas party, all three smiling broadly. "You know what's funny?" Sarah said. "All those years I spent cleaning this building, I thought I was just earning a living. But really, I was learning our father's most important lesson." "What's that?" James asked. "That true wealth isn't in a bank account. It's in how you treat people, in the dignity you give them, in the dreams you help them achieve." James put his arm around his sister's shoulders. "Dad knew that all along. He just had to wait for us to figure it out ourselves." Outside their office window, the sun was setting over the city. The Maxwell Enterprises building cast a long shadow. It was no longer a shadow of cold corporate power. Instead, it had become a beacon of hope, showing that when family, dignity, and love come together, anything is possible. Sarah looked at their father's portrait on the wall. Their eyes, seemed to twinkle with pride. She whispered softly, "We did it, Dad. We finally became the family you always wanted us to be."